fishery subsidies. Their talks on the matter have been going on for 20 years. They wish to have conclusive outcomes in the talks even before their 12th ministerial conference in late 2021. With that said, the history of the WTO negotiations show that we can expect nothing but an agenda to reinforce corporate power, even as the pandemic exposed the failures of neoliberalism. Colleagues, the WTO talks on fisheries are not talks to support small fisherfolk livelihoods or the sectors most vulnerable to economic shocks. In fact, the small fishers and working people are not deciding on the global rules. Yet, any outcome of the WTO talks on fishery subsidies would severely affect their economic rights. The WTO outcome would likely further sink the small fishers' livelihoods amid the ongoing economic and health crises. So in our discussion today, we will hear from fisherfolk movements and allied CSOs from Indonesia, Zambia, Sri Lanka, Chile, the Philippines, as well as from the Pacific region and even from peasants in Asia. We will hear about their concerns on the negotiations and about neoliberal globalization as a whole. We will also hear about movements' demands to assert their rights to food, control over resources, and to determine their sustainable economic development. Today, we also hope to draw attention to the main systemic cause of the attacks on the rights of small fishers and food producers. It is the system, my friends, dominated by the big commercial fishers, along with the governments and international institutions, reinforcing their corporate power and monopolies. And the WTO has been playing a major role in this monopoly capitalist system through the promotion of economic liberalization and deregulation for decades. So we echo movements, no, when they say that we must not allow the WTO and the corporate interests they represent to have the power over the world's fisheries, and by extension, to not have the power over the millions of small-scale fisherfolk, the workers in the fishing industry, and consumers around the world. To end, no, we see that from inequalities in vaccines to plunder in the fisheries sector, the WTO has been consistently the opposite of what the world needs today. So we invite everyone to listen closely to the movements and stand in solidarity with their calls and initiatives, whether it's about expanding support to livelihoods, whether it's about fighting for food sovereignty, and even their calls perhaps to junk the WTO. Looking forward to the thoughtful discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Rodolfo Lahoy from Ebon International. As he has already kind of set the stage that today we are going to discuss about WTO fisheries subsidies and how the small-scale fishers do not have. I think I would request all the participants to please mute yourself when you are not speaking. Yes, thank you very much. So basically, in WTO, small-scale fishers do not have a say to determine any policy, but whatever is determined at WTO impacts the livelihoods of small-scale fishers, which is absolutely a neoliberal agenda imposed on them. So let us continue to take in what we have heard with an overview on the WTO negotiation on fishery subsidies, and that we will hear from a recorded video from our next speaker. Actually, we were expecting Adam Olfenden here today in our Zoom to be present, but for certain reasons, unavoidable reasons, he has not been able to join, but he has sent a recorded video, which will be played by our colleagues here. Let me introduce him. He is the trade justice campaigner for the Pacific Network on Globalization, abbreviation is PAN, a Pacific regional network promoting economic justice and self-determination in the Pacific Islands. Adam has worked in the Pacific for over 10 years monitoring negotiations on numerous regional trade agreements, WTO accessions, and working against resource grabbing. So I would request our technical assistants now to play the recorded video of Adam Wolfenden.
Hi, everyone. My name's Adam Wolfenden. I work with the Pacific Network on Globalization. First of all, I'd like to just say thank you for giving Pang, or inviting Pang to be part of this webinar, and for putting a lot of the work in for this opportunity. I'd like to just first of all acknowledge that I live on unceded Awabakal and Worimi country in Australia. But Pang itself is a Pacific Islands-based organisation based out of Fiji, but working across the whole Pacific Islands area. So again, thank you. I'll just pull up my presentation. Hopefully this works fine. Yeah, so I just want to give a quick overview of the WTO negotiations and kind of some of the context with which the political dynamics are playing out. This is, so the title of it is Fishing for Access. This is a title actually for a presentation I used earlier in the year, but I actually think it just really sums up this context that the negotiations are in. So to set the scene, there's a lot of data out there saying the level of stocks that are being fished beyond their sort of sustainable levels, that's quite widely recognized. And that's kind of been the precursor to a lot of the push for these negotiations. So developing countries are on the front line with these talks, both in terms of the communities that are most vulnerable, so fisherfolk communities, anyone sort of really rely on government subsidies and support for their livelihoods. But they're also on the front line in terms of the policy space that they're being asked to give up within these negotiations. As the resource holders of a lot of these fish, what's being requested of them in these negotiations is that they give up some of that ability down the line to actually be able to develop industries to their own resources. We've seen a lot of the big fishing nations, especially developed fishing nations, really start to move away from subsidizing in a way that builds fleets. That they're kind of at the point now where they've built their fleets and they're shifting their subsidies programs to being subsidies that really wouldn't be prohibited now within the WTO, but what the difference is that they have capacity, but they're saying that no one else should be allowed to build that capacity. So the political economic interests play out very clearly and very consistently within these talks. And that's something that you sort of need to bear in mind when we discuss what is being put on the table and the reasons to why. The WTO as a body is losing relevance. It's not really delivered any multilateral outcome for years, and they're really kind of putting a lot of weight and a lot of pressure on delivering something, and the fisheries negotiations is probably the thing closest to getting some kind of resolution. So internally, we have a WTO Secretariat institution that's pushing very hard for this. We also have the mandate from the Sustainable Development Goal 14.6. So we see that come up a lot. We see comments like leaders said we have to deliver this thing. Really start to piggyback with this institution desperate for relevance within the global community. So we have a lot of moving parts, a lot of things at play within these negotiations, and I think the important thing is to just remember that it's access, it's interest. This is what they're after. This is what they've always been after. And it's no surprise that it's a body like the WTO that is really taking this on. Like, there are a lot of other sustainable development goals that aren't being addressed, even though they're sort of linked into the WTO. That this is the one, the fisheries one, that has a lot of commercial interests from Europe, from the US, from Japan, from elsewhere, and they're running with that. They're really using this SDG as the sort of the cover to push through these market access desires within the WTO. So when we're talking about the negotiations, there's three main pillars of prohibitions. So these are the areas, the avenues that they want to prevent subsidies from being applied to. So we have IUU fishing, so illegal, unreported, unregulated fishing. A lot of the content of those negotiations is around the processes, the procedures, and who gets to determine what. Overfished stocks is for subsidies to stocks that have been deemed to be overfished. And overfishing and overcapacity is sort of subsidies that contribute to this overcapacity and overfishing done by fishing fleets. If you sort of go back to the SDG, they want to eliminate IUU subsidies and then it's curb certain types of subsidies that contribute to overfishing and overcapacity. So there's some nuance within the language. Within the negotiations, we also have special and differential treatment. That is part of the SDG mandate to be appropriate and effective. And it's constantly discussed as being an obstacle, as being a problematic aspect of the negotiations. That's a highly problematic way to frame SDT. It's something that is developing nations have had to fight for and have included within these bodies. And so it's as much a part of the negotiations as the prohibitions. So we need to remember that and fight for that. Pardon me. Within the negotiations, there's also issues around notifications. And that's important because this is often something that developing countries struggle with. They often miss their notification requirements. And dispute settlement, which is basically where the WTO gets to come in and say to governments, you've done the wrong thing. And that matters in these negotiations because that gets tied into the way sovereign nations manage their fisheries and how they conserve their resources. So for small-scale fishers in the WTO, small-scale fishers are some of the most vulnerable communities, and especially to any cuts for government subsidies. They're on the front line, and whilst there is some recognition that they are especially vulnerable within the WTO, we're kind of seeing that approach be kind of focused on a subset. So within the current talks, there's exemptions that they're only going to apply to low-income, resource-poor, and livelihood fishing within 12 nautical miles. So to be part of the exemption, you have to tick all of those boxes. So, this isn't for everyone. This isn't for all those communities. It's just for a very specific subset and for fishing within 12 nautical miles, which isn't necessarily a great, it's a limit that's in a lot of ways arbitrarily imposed on these communities because, some small-scale fishers do go beyond that. There are reasons why that happens intentionally or unintentionally. So we're seeing already this focus on small-scale fishers within the WTO really problematic and limiting in the way it's being approached. So the current proposals within the WTO say for IUU fishing and overfished stocks, there's a proposal for like a 2-year peace clause, which basically it gives developing countries 2 years to phase out any subsidies that might apply to these communities that would be classified as either being part of IUU fishing or supporting subsidies for fishing of stocks that are overfished. 2 years is an incredibly short amount of time. I don't think that does anything to really support those communities and how they would move away from any shift in subsidies regimes. So again, we're seeing this really narrowing of support and space for these communities. For overfishing and overcapacity, there is a current proposal that exemption, this low-income, resource-poor, livelihood fishing within 12 nautical miles, exemption be made a permanent one. That's one proposal, but that also is bundled in with a whole range of other more problematic aspects as well. So there are proposals that possibly seem a bit more progressive, but I think that's within the context of things heading in a very bad direction. So on overfishing and overcapacity and overfish stocks, we see that there is this clause that's being proposed, which is essentially, they call it the hybrid approach, but it's essentially saying there's a flexibility built in which says you can subsidize as you want, provided you can prove that the stocks are sustainably managed. Now, this raises a whole bunch of questions around who gets to determine this, and what happens if another country comes in with a differing opinion. So we see, there's a very real threat that the EU, the US, these countries who have much greater capacity to observe data and interpret that data of fish stocks could challenge another member's management of their fish stocks. This is an area that WTO has no expertise on, and is something that a lot of countries are highly critical of and worried about. And what it also does, and I'll mention this later, is it provides this enormous carve out for those countries who can subsidize and prove the management of their fisheries to just keep going in business as usual. And that's a key aspect of these negotiations that a lot of developing countries are unhappy about. They say it's an imbalanced text. It allows the big subsidizers essentially a permanent carve out to keep going as they have been previously. So that's a key issue. The other one is around the economic sovereignty that these countries have. So under the UN Convention of the Law of the Sea, those signatories to that, which is most countries, have the sovereign right to manage the resources within their exclusive economic zone. What the WTO is doing is coming in with rules that will say that that's not the case. They will say maybe just that 12 nautical mile zone, but not the full 200 nautical miles of the EEZ, which is a huge loss of sovereignty and a huge loss of policy space for these countries. Sorry, I'm moving through things very quickly because I'm aware I'm already over time. Key takeaway point, big subsidizers are happy. They, like I was saying, this imbalanced text, which gives them permanent carve-outs, provided they can, show it's sustainable, it's being referred to as reverse special and differential treatment. So the big subsidizers get a permanent flexibility. And like I said, they have the capacity to not only subsidize their fleets, they can monitor their stocks and mount challenges against other nations, so presumably developing country nations. And the other point I'll make is for these big subsidizers, and this gets back to that commercial interest, this is about cutting off any threat or any challenge to their current market dominance of the fishing industry. When the Pacific looks to distant water fishing nations, there's only so many that they will go to because there's only so many that exist. And what these proposals are doing is saying that all these other countries, they can't build up their domestic fleets to fish their waters. So that for the Pacific, it'll be really hard for them to subsidize and nurture and build up a fleet so that they can maximize their returns. And that's kind of gets to the heart of what this is about. This isn't about sustainability. This isn't about the WTO being able to handle complex issues. This is about those subsidizers who have this market dominance wanting to lock that in. And that's what these proposals will do for these countries, and especially developing countries. It'll lock them out of being able to maximize and exploit their waters as they are currently allowed to. So I'll quickly finalize there was a ministerial yesterday. It's been hailed as a success. The Director General, the chair of the negotiations, very happy, really trying to sell it as this big win. Probably the biggest thing is that they've agreed that the current text can be used as a way forward, which is highly problematic. A lot of the major issues still remain. But I mean, a lot of the developing countries, we saw their positions, we heard of their positions within this ministerial, basically saying they didn't agree with this text, they didn't like the text, there's still major issues with it, but we're seeing the chair and the WTO institution pushing forward, kind of saying, no, we'll be fine, we'll work it out. They want to wrap up these negotiations before the full-blown ministerial in December. Partly that's to take some of the pressure off it, but I think it's also partly because they know that if it's a virtual ministerial, it will be incredibly hard to negotiate and reach a conclusion, as they normally do within these spaces. They, all the ministers get together in person, they can work it out, be pressured, etc. In a virtual setting, that's really hard. I don't think they'll be able to do it. So the Secretariat is really keen to have that resolved, have these negotiations resolved or but resolved before the ministerial. Primarily, I think as well, so they can deliver something. They can say, we've agreed, everyone's agreed, they're happy. So that will mean that there's huge pressure on developing countries right now, and in the lead up to that ministerial. And so we need to really start to give countries a counter narrative, an alternative sort of perspective on these negotiations. And I think that's where a lot of the other people speaking later will really come into it. And yeah, apologies. I believe I've gone quite a bit over time, and for that, I'm very sorry. And I'm also very sorry that I can't be there in person today. Here are some extra resources. The World is Not for Sale site has quite a lot. Pang's website is currently being rebuilt at the moment, but it has some of the stuff up there. So again, thank you to the organisers and to everyone. I will stop this now. And yeah, good luck for the rest of the meeting. And again, apologies, I can't be there. Thank you. Bye.
Oppose the Manila Bay Reclamation. Oppose the Bacoor Reclamation and Development Project. The 420-hectare reclamation project will displace at least 700 fisherfolk families from the coastal communities of Bacoor City, just south of Manila in the Philippines. It is violative of the Supreme Court mandamus to clean up, rehabilitate, and preserve Manila Bay, and restore and maintain its waters. Oppose the Bulacan Aerotropolis Project. The 2,500-hectare reclamation project of San Miguel Corporation or SMC will displace at least 700 fisherfolk families of Bulacan town of the Bulacan province, north of Manila. It will destroy the mangrove forest and marine environment, and will worsen the impact of flooding at the communities within and of the adjacent areas. Both reclamation projects are violative of the Supreme Court mandamus to rehabilitate Manila Bay, detrimental to the rights of the poor fisherfolk sector, and destructive to the marine environment. Please use in social media, #oppose Manila Bay Reclamation, #oppose Bacoor Reclamation Project, #oppose Bulacan Aerotropolis Project. Please support the campaign of Pamalakaya Pilipinas or National Federation of Small Fisherfolk Organizations in the Philippines against reclamation and displacement. This is Stephanie, a volunteer for Pamalakaya Pilipinas, calling for a nationalist and democratic fisheries code, now.
We thank Adam Olfenden for this recorded message where he has very nicely described what are the major threats in these WTO negotiations, subsidy negotiations. Basically, it's about taking the small-scale fishers out of the entire discussions of small-scale fisheries governance. Let us continue our discussion. Now we will have our few speakers who will make their presentations one after another. Let me first introduce the speakers. Our next set of presenters will share the impacts on small-scale fishers and demands for food sovereignty in regional perspectives. I am now going to introduce the speakers in order of their presentation. So we will hear from Mr. Herman Kumara first. He is a human rights defender and the national convener of the National Fisheries Solidarity Movement, NAFSO, of Sri Lanka. In October 2012, NAFSO received the Food Sovereignty Program Award from the Why Hunger campaign. In addition to this, in 1997, the organization received the Margarita Lizarraga Award of the Food and Agricultural Organization for their work towards the promotion of sustainable fisheries. After Herman, we expect Frankie from the Southeast Asia Organization, Alianza Gerakan Reforma Agraria, or AGRA, commonly known as AGRA, will take the floor. AGRA is an Indonesian peasant organization formed in 2004 that struggles for their genuine agrarian reform. At the regional level, it is a member of Asian Peasant Coalition. After AGRA, we will be listening to Mr. Gersom Cabasso, and he is representing Zambia Social Forum. He's the executive director of the Zambia Social Forum, and he's also the coordinator of PCFS Africa. And last but not the least, we will listen from Zoila Bustamante. She's the president of the Confederation. It's a big Latin American name, but it is very well known as CONAPACH, Confederación Nacional de Pescadores Artesanales de Chiles, or CONAPACH, very commonly known as CONAPACH, and a member of the People's Coalition on Food Sovereignty Latin America continent. So now these are our speakers. So I would request our participants to welcome Herman, Frankie, Gersom, and Zoila. And without taking much time, may I request Herman to take the floor, please.
Thank you, Eugenia, and also the organizers of PCFS for organizing this very important event at this moment, which is very crucial because we know, and also inviting us as Asians is very important because Asia is supposed to be one of the major, let's say 85% of small-scale fishers are living in this continent, this area. So it's very important for us about these negotiations because small-scale fishers are left out if these things are happening. So in that context, we should say any negotiations for fishing subsidies that commence or going on at the WTO to ensure the interest of the artisanal fishers. Without that, we cannot survive at this moment. And subsidizing industrial fishing for European Union or China and other industrialized countries that will threaten the livelihoods of coastal communities, which are already having a lot of negative impacts of because of climate change and also poverty and marine pollution. At the same time, the Food and Agriculture Organization itself says that 9% of the world fishing grounds are being overexploited or destroyed. So in that context, this should be very carefully considered to subsidize to the industrial countries. And also, as South Asians, we need to have very collaborative work to protect the small-scale fisheries, our traditional fishing, traditional fishing sector to combat illegal, destructive fishing such as bottom trawling, light purseines, and we need to strengthen conservation and fisheries management through ecosystem-based resource management practices so that we promote in this process. And also, regulated fishing combined with the development of clean water, power, sanitation, education, and transportation are also very important to transform the livelihoods of small-scale fishing communities, their well-being, better future. By pushing to keep obviously harmful subsidies to the industrialized countries like Europe, European Union, and they are promoting a race to the bottom that is into the healthy recovery of our oceans and the survival of many fishing communities. That is really a danger. So we, on that context, we know, and we have already done a study about in South Asia and Southeast Asian countries, 5 Southeast Asian countries, about the context of blue economy, which promote more and more industrialized economy, promote the blue economy and to plunder the sea, so that we expect to do all these things based on the blue justice and this process against the blue economy paradigm for the sustenance of fishing, small scale fishers particularly. And on that, we hope to achieve the food sovereignty. We need tenure access and also social cultural impacts, gender equity, environmental justice, ecosystem services, economic benefits for all the fishing communities to achieve food sovereignty. So this is to challenge the blue economy and to survive, mainly the survival. If the WTO subsidies for the industrialist countries will be promoted, we will be wiped out. So we promote all the negotiation should be focused the betterment of the small scale fishers. So I think for the time being, that is my submission, Jenny and the team. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Herman. I think, you have very rightly pointed out that WTO subsidy would be a big hurdle for small-scale fishers to achieve food sovereignty. And just adding from the South Asian perspective, Indian government is also pretty much against this WTO subsidy negotiation. I mean, particularly the text. I do not know how things will move, but at present, the government of India has also taken a strong position against this subsidy. Without taking more time, let me invite our next speaker. And do we have our friend from Agra ready here with the internet connection, etc.? There was an issue. Do we have Frankie from Agra with us? Since Agra is not yet available, then let us first move on and listen to Gersom Cabalso. As I have already introduced Gersom, representing Zambia Social Forum and coordinator PCFS Africa. Gersom, floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, dear comrades. Good afternoon from Lusaka, Zambia, Africa. I will be presenting the challenges which the fish folks are faced with as far as WTO proposals regulating the fisheries concerned globally. This was supposed to be done by Zambia Foundation, but however, they are quite busy with other things. As you are aware that Zambia we are preparing for the next pause, which will be happening next coming 2 weeks or so. However, let me do just a presentation what the challenges and the concerns the fish folks which we are faced with. Are you able to see my presentation, the PowerPoint?
Yes, your screen, yes, basically. But that's something
Okay.
else. I don't think you want to share this, what you are sharing right now. It's
Yes, I
plain in
want to share the PowerPoint presentation.
Yeah,
Yeah, just a minute.
sure.
Just a minute. Okay. Here you are. Are you able to see it? Confirm?
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay.
Go full screen,
Yeah.
please. Go full screen.
I put full screen.
Yes, go full screen with your presentation. I mean, full PowerPoint mode. PowerPoint full
Okay.
screen. Down here.
Go to
Where is
slideshow. Go to
slideshow?
Slideshow.
Slideshow, basically.
Slideshow.
Slideshow.
Thank you very much for that. It's more technical, difficult. Yes, I was saying I'm presenting this on the behalf of Keeper Zambia Foundation. Keeper Zambia Foundation has been involved working with the fish folks in about 7 districts of Republic of Zambia. So they work directly with fisher folks who are managing the blue water resources within southern province of Republic of Zambia and part of southern. So as you may be aware that small-scale fisheries are among the most fish folks in aquaculture fisheries that has been within the lower ranks in the categories of fishers. Yeah, these fisheries are labor-intensive fisheries using relatively small fishing gear, as well as the little capital and mostly without proper equipments. Most of these are family-owned and run as a small business to sustain their livelihood. Government always rely to support them to expand their business, both in aquaculture as well as capture. However, most governments, like in our case as Zambia, are quickly to accept the trade with other countries at the expenses of small-scale fisheries. This distorts the fisheries value chain as far as providing the nutrition, providing food security, as well as for them to sustain their income in terms of selling to other people who might have had an opportunity to go and resell the fishes. The small-scale fisheries are also expected to overexploit the fishery resources to meet the demand, that is the quantity, and to recoup the cost of fishing and taxes. At the international level, this will mean that the natural water body's ecosystem is going to be disturbed, thereby causing distinction of the common resources fish. The small-scale fisheries is left with no option but to look for alternative livelihood for their income activities. The most fisheries have developed a new technologies in capture and aquafish to enable them acquire or adequately supply fish on the international market. While the small-scale fisheries are still struggling with the capital investment and the kind of the equipment they have been given up of seeing what the WTO as an opportunity for business growth. While on the markets have been expanded from the restricted region to truly a global market, freezing and storage technologies along with the low transportation costs that have facilitated the globalization of the fish trade. To this, there is also imbalances of the trade between Africa, particularly like in case of Zambia and other outside world, of which most of the countries are well equipped with the freezing as well as the storage equipment market, which is also possible for them to bring fish to Africa and so forth. The small-scale fisheries have become spectators and receivers instead of being key players. The fish process is still concerned among many small-scale fisheries, meaning that the fish losses are high among small-scale fisheries, particularly the youths and women. Furthermore, most of the small-scale fisheries do not have tenure rights, access to control over natural resources, and this makes it easier for commercial entities to exploit them. This is also compounded by lack of land, citing, in fact, even the facilities and investment grants to compete with commercial and international companies. While some of these challenges faced by the small-scale fisheries, coupled with the W Trade Organization intention of securing an agreement on eliminating subsidies, it will also get rid of already struggling fishers, deprive them the means of income and survival, and their rights to access healthy and culturally accepted food produced through ecological means. The elimination of subsidies, which is the small-scale fisheries' potential growth, will be also pipe dream and commercial entities used to manipulate the small-scale fisheries as a subcontractor to supply fish. This also makes the small-scale farmers must have an equal access to common good within their capital and the rights. And if to this, they should be at the center of managing natural resources and fish stocks in their local water bodies. Community empowerment processes among fish folks should be strengthening for them to sustainably manage their own resources in order for them to earn secure livelihood. And the rights of the small-scale fishery should be at the center of policies and regulation regarding natural water bodies to promote their rights and livelihood of fish folks. Given that the World Trade Organization, the mandate to decide on the fate of the world fisheries, it will erode away coping mechanism of small-scale fisheries and give competitive advantage to international and rich companies, as many as the small-scale fisheries will be restricted, and reaching fishing cooperative will also enjoy incentives through exemptions, investment grants, and other subsidies within small-scale fisheries that cannot have access. Thank you. So these are some of the challenges which the Keep Zambia have just gotten from their working with the fish folks for the past 12 years. For them, they are saying the fish folks, they have their own way of managing the water resources bodies, where some of them, they even pay license for them to catch fish in the natural bodies. And also in our case of Zambia, there is a fish ban, which normally happens with every year between December up to March, the following coming year, where the natural bodies, it gives the chances for it to have the natural breeding of the fish, the small fish, so that they can become big and so forth. While during this fish banning, the village committees made up of the various stakeholders within the village setup around the natural water bodies, they also take part in terms of controlling and patrolling at nights to curb those people who are not or who are doing illegal way of fish farming within the same Nile of the water. So I think in that regard, they say it is up to them and up to them for them to ensure that they have got sustainable consumption of the fish without anyone intruding into their territory. And also in that regard, they are working hand in hand with the Department of Fisheries to ensure that they manage the natural water bodies for them to have the fish, for them to have natural water bodies which will be able to produce the quality of fish for them and for the next generation to come. So the borders for them to protect the fishes lies within the village community setup. Thank you.
Thank you, Gershom, for this wonderful presentation. And as we can see that the problems are very similar from one continent to other, and this fight is also a common fight. So let us now hear the situation of the fisherfolk communities in in Latin America. And may I request Zoila Bustamante from CONAPACH to take the floor, please. And all the participants, you are encouraged to post your comments, those who are here in the chat box and those who are listening in Facebook and YouTube in the comment section. And so over to Zoila, please.
Buenos días a todos los que están escuchando. Buenos días de Chile, porque aquí son 4 minutos para las 9 de la mañana.
It is almost 9 a.m. in Chile. Good afternoon for everyone who is in all the continents, and well, thank you for your invitation. My name is Zoila Bustamante. I am the president of the National Confederation of Artisanal Fishermen called CONAPACH, and I am also a member of the People's Coalition on Food Sovereignty and Fishermen, Artisanal Fishermen. We will be holding a meeting during the next weeks. We are very concerned as well about the subsidies that are being given to the big fleets. They are mainly the ones destroying our coastal waters. In fact, in Chile, we had a Chinese fleet which came into the Magallanes Strait and came upwards. And really what they do is to destroy everything that they find. We are very, very concerned with this topic, and we are working with other NGOs towards this topic because the fishermen communities would like to benefit from these subsidies, even taking into account that our government is benefiting these big fleets. As I said, taking into account that our governments are subsidizing the commercial fleets and not subsidizing the artisanal fleets. It is true that currently we faced a major problem with the COVID-19 pandemic, and this has been a major issue for all the sectors, all the productive sectors. It is the only sector that didn't get any support in Chile. It was the artisanal fishing sector. We didn't have any direct subsidies, and these, of course, caused many problems among other sectors. Still, we kept producing and we kept working. We all know that we have been very active working on subsidies, but the major problem is that these subsidies are detrimental for us, and especially for illegal fishing. Therefore, for us, it is very important. Just 1 minute, please.
Disculpen, por favor. Para nosotros como pescadores.
Apologies. As we said, as artisanal fishermen, as I told you, We have a direct, in fact, we have a document that we can send to you, which is the role of artisanal fishing in the topic of subsidies. What we want to do is that we had subsidies. We have been working with other organizations regarding this topic. We let them know that we do not agree with these kind of detrimental subsidies for our sector and in general for the artisanal fishing and small-scale fishing. As I told you, we have been working with the Latin American Union, where there are 13 countries that are part of this union. And we have also been working on a document, which I would like to read to all of you. I would like to read some parts of this text so that we can see that, well, from our side, we have been working. It says that the role of the artisanal fishermen and our role in CONAPACH is the suppression of Latin American resources for the promotion of incentives towards the WTO. Now we have the negotiations for the elimination of subsidies, and those are a fundamental pillar for economic sustainability, social sustainability on a world basis. Member states and some regional groups that are part of these negotiations have focused on three main pillars. Apologies. Apologies. Just one moment, please.
Los esfuerzos en tres pilares fundamentales.
Prohibition of subsidies on illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing. Prohibition of subsidies for overfished stocks. The prohibition of subsidies for overcapacity in terms of fishing. The current numbers, according to different studies, can show that more than 60% of the current subsidies to fishing spent by global governments are linked to detrimental subsidies because they do not promote the increase of fishing production. That is, those that promote fishing beyond the sustainable levels. Chile is an active member of the WTO, which is the only organization that will allow on a short-term and medium and long-term basis the agreement by all these states to define agreements and to give solutions to these detrimental subsidies. Taking into account that the biodiversity is decreasing due to this exploitation of fishing resources and that detrimental subsidies have not been eliminated yet, when many member states wanted to postpone these objectives during the last year, it is necessary that global organizations representing the artisanal fishing, not only in Chile, but also in Latin America and on a worldwide basis, they should promote the management and sustainable production of fishing. And the support to these initiatives should highlight the importance of all the agents, both private and public, and the policies linked to these policies. We should have an agreement on a worldwide basis. The National Confederation of Fishermen in Chile recognizes the need to have an agreement on elimination of detrimental subsidies to fishing and to promote the access to subsidies that will allow to invest in conservation, promotion of natural resources in areas that should be protected and netly protected for the artisanal fishing. Why? Because we have different areas on the coastal waters which are protected, but the most serious problem is that this is not shared with the artisanal fishing sector. this is only protected for the sector. I also wanted to say that we have been working on this document under the National Confederation of Chile so that you can see that we are greatly concerned. And I would like to say this again. We are very, very concerned about the subsidies for fuel for these big fleets that are out there to destroy our oceans. We can see this under the exclusive zones. It is true that under these exclusive economic zones, they are there, and we could prove that there were more than 17 Chinese boats that were there in our coastal waters in Chile. And then after they were there, we didn't have even stones because they destroyed everything. So I just wanted to highlight that this subsidies topic is very, very important for us, even taking into account that we are in an era where we cannot talk. Maybe you could notice that most of the coastal communities do not have access to internet. Therefore, we are not able to communicate. We do not have face-to-face meetings, and therefore we are not there. We cannot be there. And that's why this invitation for us is greatly important. Of course, we got this on a short notice. It was 2 days ago. But for us, it is hugely important. And even more, taking into account that everything is being done with these webinars nowadays. And as you know, we and the big part of our communities, we do not have access to the internet. And that cut our hands. The artisanal fishing in Chile is taking note of this. And with this pandemic, we got zero support. And the minimal support that we got was given to other sectors and not directly to the artisanal fishing. We supported our communities with the fishing that we got, and we were not able to sell it. We gave it to our communities, and of course this helped us. I would like to apologize as well for the previous interruption. The kid that was here was my granddaughter, and that's why I had to mute myself for some seconds. And again, as I said, I would like to thank you for this invitation, and I would like to say that this is a problem. Many sectors, and I would like you to hear this, many sectors in artisanal fishing on a worldwide basis do not know that these subsidies exist. Many people didn't know about these subsidies, and I found out, I would say, 2 months ago. And that's when we saw the light and when we saw this fleet from China. So these webinars are very good, but I would like to remind everyone that we should repeat this. We should let communities know. We have to explain them what is going on because we have our hands cut. They are supporting the big industries. As the previous speaker said, they are supporting the big companies, the big commercial companies. And why? Because they have already implemented their policies and they keep destroying. And they do not take a look, they do not take into account the communities that live out of these resources. And with the pandemic, we are giving food to our communities and people. So we have to work so that our colleagues and fishermen from all these sectors who are involved in this, they need to know about this, and we need to create a real opposition. We would like to know, and we are saying to the government that we are not going to support this because they are detrimental for all these sectors. That's all I wanted to say. And again, thank you so much for this invitation. And in case you have any doubt, of course, I am at your entire disposal. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Zoila. It's a very powerful presentation that you have made. And I would say that you have highlighted some very critical point, particularly fuel subsidies is a very big issue being discussed. And then the very big point that you have raised also, which affects us, is the pandemic. In the pandemic situation, small-scale fishers, artisanal fishers, they suffered most. And now these subsidy issues going to make the small-scale fishers, artisanal fishers more vulnerable. So thank you once again for your call for solidarity across continents among the
Exactamente.
artisanal fishers. And thank you once again. Now let us move to the next speaker, move to the next presentation. Do we have our friend from Agra here?
Yeah.
Okay. So may I now request our friend from Agra? Yes.
Ya, selamat malam.
Pimpinan from Agra,
saya
please take the
pabrik
floor.
pimpinan Agra.
Yeah, Penki from Agra, please take
Yeah.
the floor. Floor is yours, and your time starts now. Thank you so much.
Ya, saya saudara Frankie dari Aliansi Gerakan Reformasi Agraria Sirenja. Nelayan semakin miskin dan tertindas. PTO menerapkan pelarangan subsidi perikanan demi melayani kepentingan imperialis.
Issue with the connection?
Ya.
Please continue. Continue.
Ya, kami kaum tani dan ya, kami kaum tani dan nelayan yang hidup di negeri kepulauan dengan garis pantai terpanjang kedua di dunia.
Recording in progress.
Yes, wait a second. I think that the interpretation is not working. English interpretation is not working. May I request our technical colleagues to fix it? May I request our friend from Agra to continue, please? Then we can understand whether the interpretation is working.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes. You are audible?
Yeah. I will translate for Penki from Agra.
Okay. I think many participants have some trouble with the interpretation. Let us continue, please.
Indonesia. Fisherfolk are getting poorer and oppressed, while WTO implements prohibition on fishing subsidies to serve imperialist interests. We are the peasant and fisherfolk who are living in the archipelago country with the second longest coastline in the world. It is located between two continents, Australia and Asia, and two oceans, India and Pacific. Our country has 17,000 islands, including 5 big islands, namely Kalimantan, Sumatra, Papua, Sulawesi, and Java. We are the people who live in the country with the sea are of 3.2 million square kilometers. Even the breadth can reach 7.9 million square kilometers. Indonesia is a very strategic country in Southeast Asia, not only because of its geographical position, but the most important is the natural wealth owned. This country reserves mineral wealth, gas, oil, gold, nickel, bauxite, and incredible wealth of the sea. There is 25% of fish in the world lives in Indonesia, even though the area of Indonesia is only 1.3% of the earth. By By the abundant wealth, Indonesia is a rich country with natural wealth to build economic and modern industry to make its people prosperous. However, it is not the reality. The majority of Indonesian people lives in poverty and suffering due to the dominations of U.S. imperialism that maintains land monopoly based of backward agricultural system. Under this system, the imperialists and their accomplices, big landlord and big bourgeois of comprador, control the natural wealth, both in lands or in waters. The majority of us are small and traditional fisher folk with simple and traditional fishing gears, such as nets and fishing rods, either purchased or made by ourselves. Part of us own small boats, the other just can borrow or rent them. Some just can follow the other fisher folk. The amount of fish we catch is very few in one time of fishing, sometimes even none. When we sell them, it's sometimes not enough to feed us for some days or to pay loans. We are also cannot go fishing every day, especially when the time of high waves and no more money to purchase fuel. Our family are very vulnerable of malnutrition, hunger, and drop out of schools. We believe our sisters in the Philippines, Malaysia, Thailand, Cambodia, etc., are facing similar situation today. There are also few middle of fishermen with more and big fishing gears on ship and own ships. However, they are very vulnerable to be dropped into lower class in a very short time. There are also a few rich fishermen who work with fish companies or large fishing boat owners. The fact the majority of fisherfolk face oppression, feudal exploitations, even capitalist exploitation from big capital owners who own big boats and modern fish gears. The ship owners sometimes force the fisherfolk to unfair profit sharing system. Besides, the poor fisherfolk who work in big ship owned by capitalists are sometimes earned with very low wage without safety guarantee during the fishing. This condition make us live in usury for fishing, food, health, school fee, or to pay our refuse loans. By this condition, we should ask about the fisheries issues meant
Oppose the
by
Manila Bay.
WTO, like illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing, overfishing, overcapacity, are addressed to whom? Why does these kinds of problems apply to prohibitions of fishing subsidies? Who actually will be victimized and benefited by this policy? We won't be tricked anymore because we have learned from reality of fisherfolk lives. We believe the regulations of WTO on fishing subsidies will only sacrifice the traditional and small or even the middle level of fisherfolk who always considered as the main cause of fisheries issues. WTO plays role as the instruments of imperialism. By this regulation, WTO opens bigger opportunity for imperialist corporate to monopolize the sea sources, especially in
Recording
captured
stopped.
fisheries sector. This regulation will close the opportunity for the poor fisher folk from the fishing crime trap, which is unfair and undemocratic in practice, especially EUUA. Prohibition on fishing subsidies means the imperialist order through WTO to eliminate the state responsibility to the problem faced by the fisher folk. Therefore, there is no any opportunity for the fisher folk to gain support and aid from the government to advance the produce production level. Even the crime risk and eviction will increase along with the applications of subsidies prohibition by the reason to suppress IUUF. We realize that the regulation will give long-term terrible impact. The fisher folk will lose their livelihoods, knowledge, and fisheries and marine culture due to stronger fishery monopoly. Fisher folk are forced to sell labor, and if there is the subsidy. So we can imagine how suffer the fisher folk with the implementations of the WTO policy. The fisher folk must struggle for their burden by owing production. Meanwhile, the price and fishery commodity distribution are fully controlled by the imperialist control market. The suffering multiplies and the usury debts are getting torturing. We must raise our voice louder. Young WTO realized the Union Agrarian Reform and build national industry to develop just new system and prosper the people. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Give me a second to go back to the original audio. Okay. Thank you, Agra, for this the presentation, which is quite in line with all the other speakers, as you have mentioned about the miseries small-scale fishers would face due to this WTO negotiations on fishery subsidies, and with a strong call for to junk WTO and to invest more on fisheries industries, which are national industries. So now I think we have listened to our speakers, first round of speakers. So thank you very much, our speakers, our presenters, each of you. Thank you very much for presenting the regional experiences. So now we will go for question answer. And as we have already mentioned in the beginning, those who are in Zoom, use the chat box. There you may ask a question directly to one of the speakers or generally to everyone. And if you are watching this webinar, listening us in Facebook or YouTube, use the comment section to post your questions. I do not see any comment, at least in Facebook at this point of time, but we will open the floor for our question answer sessions. And before doing that, may I request all our panelists, please turn on your videos. So the participants, please, if you have questions, if you have comments, if you have any points for clarification, this is the time. Our panelists are here to take your questions. I mean, I would also request the technical help to help me here. Our colleagues looking at the technical side, if you see any hand raised, please let us know. I do not see any hand raised, and there are so many participants. Okay, if we do not have many questions or comments at this point of time, I encourage you to write your comments, questions, etc. in chat box in the comment section as we move on to the next half of our webinar. And now I would like to call on our second input speaker, Ka Fernando Hica, also known as Kapando. He is the chairperson of National Federation of Small Fisherfolk Organization in the Philippines, Pamela Kaya, and former representative of the marginalized group Ankapwasi party list in the lower house of representatives of the Philippines Congress. May I request Kapando to take the floor, please?
Good evening, Jenny. Our colleagues now, good evening and good morning in other country. Thank you very much for me inviting these very important issues to sharing about the position of the Pamalakay Pilipinas about the WTO fishery subsidy. My sharing this now is our titled Towards People Powered and Sustainable Fisheries and Aquatic Resources Development. Please forward. UUF versus fishing right. Please forward. How about my Vajini? How about my
Perfect.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you very much. Fishing rights. The fishing right is dictated by the current state of relation and forces of production in the world. Specifically the state of fisheries under imperialist globalization. Concretely, imperialist or industrial capitalist countries on the outslag of over-exploiting fishing ground and international water, and to the extent of encroaching the exclusive economic zone of other countries and undermining people food security in a small-scale fisherfolk and fishing right. Please, slide number 1. Open access, historical, no? Open access regime. We're starting 13th and 19th century and towards the World War II. Second, the state property regime sent post World War II and 1958 Geneva Convention on the Territorial Sea to the 1982 United UNCLOS featuring the exclusive economic zone. Alongside the 1957 formation of EU, European Community Holding, in 1964, London Fisheries Convention, in 2009, the EU Common Fisheries Policy. Number 3, the private property regime, starting 1970s, individual transferable quota within a country of regions, total allowable catch and concept. Disposable can be sold. Common property regime, not the individual but the community who enjoy the exclusive right to harvest from particular areas. Please slide. Overfishing. The overfishing of fish stock. From 10% of fish stock in 1974 to 34% in 2017 to being classified as overfish by United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization and SOFA. EU conceptualized the IUUF in 2001 and the noble aim to draw up the UN POW International Plan to Action to cover all the fisherfolk sector and section in the world, including those of developing countries or precisely semi-feudal and semi-colonial society, such in the Philippines. Taken to crafting preventing measure against the crime over exploitation for the total of 247 fishing countries and territorial assigned by UN POW. Minority 59 high-income countries, or 23%, are essentially the beneficiaries and perpetrator. February 2015, Republic Act 10654. This is a UUF law in the Philippines, amending to Republic Act 8550 of Fisheries Code was enacted in February 2015. June 14, 2014, economic blackmail by the European Union through its insurance to yellow card warning in June 2014. The law covered the small fisher folks on unauthorized fishing or fishing without registration. A 5,000 or 100 US dollar fine for unreporting unregulated fishing, and 20,000 pesos or 400 US dollar for use of prohibited fishing gear. A UUF law threatened the below subsistence small fisher folk, Filipino fisher folk, such criminal for attempt to survive the rising cost of living, amount of penalties, displacement for the fishing sphere to production. An instrument, the UUF law, an instrument of imperialist country under the guise of sustainable fisheries, to be imposed on semi-feudal and semi-colonial societies, targeting already oppressed and marginalized small-scale fisher folks, covers up the culpability of imperialist globalization, the imperialist plunder of the planet, and the name of giant profit and exclusive economic zone of oppressed peoples that benefited imperialist country and denied the epochal abuse and exploitation on the small-scale fisher folks on the world. Continuous deny that the crisis and fisheries were perpetrated by industrial fishing sector, imperialist economies, global trade reaching for giant profit, treated semi-feudal and semi-colonial society mere unjust, major global market for fish product. A UUF of China, if the WTO is sincere in pursuing sustainable fisheries and invoked by the SDG 14, conserve in sustainability, use the ocean, seas and marine resources for sustainable development, it should be immediately imposed sanction on China. China is at present biggest capture fish production, 11.8 million metric tons, or 19% of the total in 2008. Top exporter, 14% among top importer, at 9% in 2018, based on the UN POW. Under reporting is number of fishing fleet to 2,500, which based on research at 7,000, dropping the US with 300 distant water fishing vessel. Underreported is annual capture to UN POW at 368,000 tons from 2002 and 2011. Actually, more than 12 times, or at 4.6 million tons in 2013. Majority of capture was from West Africa at 2.9 million tons per year. Worst case of illegal, unreported, and regulated fishing is at Philippines Exclusive Economic Zone at the West Philippine Sea. National law, such as Republic Act 8550 Fisheries Code and the IUUF Amendment or Republic Act 10654 are all useless against Chinese imperialist plunder in aggression, victimizing the Filipino fisher folks and the people. Chinese IUU manifestation of imperialism exposed by its state capitalist subsidies and deployment of military forces in the fishing areas. In 2013, subsidies its fishing armada with US dollar 6.5 billion, which is predominantly fuel subsidies, plundering the world fisheries areas in the West and East Africa, Southeast Asia, East Asia, Oceania, Central and South America, and even Antarctica. For example, this is a provision of our laws, Article 6, the General Principle, 6.1, state and user of living aquaculture. Aquatic resources should be conserved. Aquatic ecosystem, the right to fish carry with it the obligation to do so in responsible manner so as to ensure effective conservation and management of the living aquatic resources. 6.15, state should cooperate in order to prevent dispute relating to fishing activity and practice should be resolved in timely, peaceful and cooperative manners in accordance with applicable international agreement or as may otherwise be agreed between the parties. Pending settlement of dispute, the state concerned should make every effort to enter into provisional arrangement of a parcel nature it should be without prejudicial to the final outcome of any dispute settlement procedure. 6.18, recognizing the important contribution of artisanal and small-scale fisheries to employment, income, and food security. States should appropriately protect the right of the fisher folks and fish workers, particularly those engaged in subsistence, small-scale, and artisanal fisheries to ensure and just livelihood, as well as preferential access where appropriate to traditional fishing ground and resources and the water under the national jurisdiction. IUUF in China, WTO shall pivot attention to China's imperialist plunder of global fisheries and marine resources before implicating the small fisher folk in semi-feudal and semi-colonial society with their ambitions to fully liberalizing the global fisheries sector. Sustainable fisheries and small fisher folks fishing right. The fisheries expert and environmentalists say sustainable fishing is a small-scale fishing and regulation in the destructive industrial fishing sector. In RA 8550 or Fisheries Code, comparing the municipal fishing boat of 3 gross ton and the commercial fishing vessel. Large commercial fishing vessel with 150 gross ton and more are equivalent to 50 municipal fishing boat or more. And the medium-scale commercial fishing vessel with 20.1 tons to 100 gross ton is equivalent to 6 to 50 municipal fishing boat. And a small-scale fishing vessel with 3.1 to 20 gross ton is equivalent to 2 and 6 municipal fishing boat. A medium-scale commercial fishing vessel with 100 gross ton could catch the fish stock in 2 to 3 days. If municipal fishing boat for a month to 1.5 months of 50 days. Overfishing and the Philippine fishing ground commercial fishing. Fishing policy framework treat the small fisher folk confined to municipal fishing ground as equally kill-riding, struggle for sustainable fisheries, struggle for the small fisher folk fishing right under the framework of genuine fisheries reform and upholding of other socioeconomic and civil and political rights. For the fishing right versus fisheries code, fisheries code confinement of the municipal fisher folk at the 15 kilometers municipal water. Commercial fishing vessel could enter the municipal water deep than 7 fathom. Costly. Licensing, registration, landing fees, and other payment empower the local government units to enact ordinance detrimental to the welfare of the small fisher folk sector and useless against destructive government and private sector for project and the displacement of the fisher folks community. The fisher folks movement campaigning repeal the fisheries code of 1998, new law or genuine fisheries reform and upholding the fishing right of small fisher folks. And also campaigning the law not even the fisheries code uphold the right to tenure of the small fisher folk sector to the Bay Area community. And the sector has no other weapon but the united strength of the fisher folks organizations. Amid the Philippines as part of the UN PAO voluntary guidelines for securing sustainable small-scale fisheries in the context of food security, poverty eradication, post recognition of the sector right to tenure. In particular sa Manila Bay reclamation, we have 420 hectares backhaul reclamation project. We have 2,500 hectares San Miguel Erythropolis Incorporated or Erythropolis project in Bulacan. Dredging reclamation activity in Nabuta City, Laguna Lake Fisher Folks organizations versus defacement effort of local government versus anti-fisher folks policies and ordinance. And also campaigning fisher folks organization defending the right to tenure as physical base of the fishing right. Primary form of the struggle is the mass movement or consolidation of the fisher folk organizations and mobilization or mass protest to advance set objectives. Campaigning also complemented by parliamentary form, dialogue, lobbying, policy, crafting, and recommendation petition to national office and even international agency, filing of charges. For example, the House Bill Special Protection to Coastal Fishing Community, House Bill 15,000 financial support to 1 million fisher folks, House Bill repeal of San Miguel Corporation Erythropolis franchise law, House resolution on the threat of displacement of Nabuta's fishing community by San Miguel Corporation Reclamation Project. Ombudsman case against Bacoor City Mayor Lani Revilla on violations of the Supreme Court mandamus to Manila Bay Rehabilitation. And 3, petition to the United Nations against Chinese imperialist plunder in aggression and the West Philippine Sea. Crafting of House Bill Genuine Fisheries and Aquatic Reform, Bill o JPARB, and more. Under the pandemic, campaigning out numerous of relief operations for fishing community, usually from support and advocate group in other sector. Regularly carrying out public information campaign, education, and mass media work to expose anti-fisher folks and anti-people program and policies, garnering public support for the fisher folks mass campaign in action. uphold sustainable fisheries by giving the small scale and artisanal fisherfolk sector around the globe. This is our demand of the Filipino fisherfolk movement and the use of WTO fishing subsidy. A. Uphold sustainable fisheries by giving the small scale and artisanal fisherfolk sector around the globe more and adequate subsidies and the framework of social justice, right to food, right to work, and equal remuneration, right to adequate standard of living, national food security, food sovereignty, environmental protection, national development, and national sovereignty. Cooperative, the fisheries distribution sector, and abolish the monopoly control of big traders. And also hold the imperialist China, other imperialist countries who are engaging in plundering the global fisheries and marine resources, and the destruction of the marine environment, seriously accountable for the crisis and fisheries as manifested by the overfishing and dictator. Cooperative and the small of medium scale cooperativize the small to medium scale commercial fishing vessel up to 150 gross ton, regulate their operation and subsidize them to be able to operate these respective countries distant and the framework of national food security, food sovereignty, environmental protection, and national development. Respect the fishing right to the small scale and artisanal fisherfolk and communal fishing water and protect the from abuse of plunderous and destructive industrial and commercial fishing operation. And lastly, revoke the World Trade Organization agreement and agriculture abolish WTO. Good evening and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kapando, for sharing such a wonderful and wide picture of the situation of the small-scale fishers in Philippines, and also giving us concrete suggestions on how we can counter the neoliberal policies imposed by the WTO and how we can uphold sustainable fishery policies. You have also mentioned about the voluntary guideline on small-scale fisheries, as well as the role of China in this entire WTO fisheries negotiation. So thank you very much for joining us today and for sharing your experiences with us. Before we move on to our unity statement, are there any questions from the participants? I think earlier Mr. Hari wanted to ask a question. Is he still interested to ask a question? He may also use the chat box and can write his question over there. And I mean, if he's from Nepal, then Narendra ji, please help Hari ji to raise his question. If the question can be parked for a while without taking much more time, then we will move on to our next speaker. So for our next speaker, we call on our colleague from the People's Coalition on Food Sovereignty, Wali Haider, to read and discuss our unity statement. After that, we will open the floor to entertain questions in relation to the unity statement. So I invite Wali Haider, please take the floor and share with us the unity statement.
Thank you very much, Ujani. Thanks a lot, and thanks for all the great speakers for putting together this very important issue upfront and bringing out the liberalization of aquaculture, the fisheries sector, as friends speak a lot, that how our local communities dependent on the fisheries sector been highly affected, and the WTO subsidies been deteriorating their situation more. So now it's time for a collective voice from all of us. This is a unity statement, a draft statement prepared. I will read it. If friends here and colleagues want to add something or want to amend something, please let me know. I'll go through, and I hope you have this on the screen. So, unity statement. WTO out of fisheries, end the global plunder of our seas. Global fisheries and by extension its subsidies are not merely trade issue but people's rights, ecosystem, food security, sovereignty and development. We, the small fisherfolk organization of the Global South and advocates, rejects the current negotiation of the World Trade Organization on global fisheries subsidy in both process and substance. It is clear that the trajectory of the World Trade Organization discussion pose a threat to the people's right to livelihood, food, and right over their resources and sovereignty. The 20-year negotiation of harmful fisheries subsidies in the WTO has only served to stall any potential meaningful reform and cover up for ocean grabbers and plunders. Without holding big subsidizer and fishing monopolies accountable, WTO's claim to work for ocean conservation and equal opportunity hold no water, so to speak. Meanwhile, the vast majority of small-scale fisherfolk and fisher worker remain poor and neglected despite providing a vital force of national food security. Despite this, more than 80% of the subsidies go to large fleets which fish for export. In addition, the current paradigm of addressing illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing, IUUF, unfairly burden small fisher at best, and it used to phase them out at worst. Given its history as an instrument of monopoly capitalist agenda, we have no illusion that the WTO negotiation will yield pro-people reform in global fisheries. Subsidized plunder. The current global fisheries regime is reflective of the unjust, unequitable, and unsustainable food system. It is one of the colonial plunder. Fishing vessels flagged from 5 wealthy countries alone account for 87% of high seas fishing globally. The relentless and subsidized race of profit between these countries have led to stock collapse and overfishing in pelagic and migratory fishing. In addition, the remaining 48% of the oceans and seas of national water are pillaged by vessels from the same wealthy countries. In fact, China, Taiwan, and South Korea alone account for a whooping 63% of fishing efforts in the exclusive economic zone of developing countries. Furthermore, the export-oriented production of fish, as designed by WTO rule and its enabling institutions, have led to it being one of the most traded commodities globally. Majority of these are from developing countries, despite the fact that for some, up to 80% of their population depend on fish as their main source of protein. In coastal communities, access to fish can spell the difference between normal and stunt growth in children. The ever-increasing demand for European Union, United States, Japan, and the three biggest fish importer and other wealthy nations have put a strain on developing countries' exclusive economic zone ocean and food security. As these well-oiled fleets push small fisher closer to the shore, the failing catch of artisanal fishing can plunge 850 million people more into hunger. A global concentrated effort in pivoting the state of our seas and the fisheries sector is an urgent need, especially for small island state and developing countries of global south. Fisheries play a vital role in ending hunger and poverty, promoting food sovereignty and addressing climate change. It should be recognized that small scale artisanal and traditional fisherfolk, despite poverty and lack of support, continue to feed the global south sustainably. A people powered and sustainable fisheries and aquatic resource development paradigm should be adopted. Pivoting towards just, equitable, healthy, and sustainable food systems required policies and put people's rights, justice, and the planet at the center and not profit. In particular, we demand the policymakers and duty barriers the following: uphold sustainable fisheries by giving the small scale and artisanal fisher folk sectors around the globe more and educate subsidies in the framework of social justice, right to food, right to work, and equal remuneration, right to adequate standard of living, national food security, people's food sovereignty, environmental protection, national development, and national sovereignty. Number two, copyrightize.
Wali, I'm sorry to disturb you. I mean, if you could just touch the point a bit faster, there is a time issue. Sorry.
I'm sorry. Just I'll finish fast. The fishery distribution sector and abolish the monopoly control of big traders. Hold imperialistic China, US, and other imperialistic countries who are engaging in plundering the global fishery and marine resources and destruction of the marine environment, seriously accountable for crisis in fisheries as manifested by the overfishing indicator. Cooperatize that the small and medium scale commercial fishing vessels and regulate their operation and subsidize them to be able to operate in their respective countries. Number five, respect the fishing right of a small scale and artisanal fisher folk in the communal fishing water and protect in it from abuse of destructive industrial and commercial fishing operation. Last but not the least, number six demand, revoke the World Trade Organization Agreement on Agriculture and abolish the WTO. Instead, it would be necessary to envision a trade and investment regime founded on principle of sovereignty, people's rights, solidarity, mutual cooperation, and benefit, as well as democracy and accountability to the people. The situation required a system and serve the need to working people and small scale producer and their right to lead development path at national level. Thank you, Jenny. I hope people will agree to this unity statement.
Thank you very much, Wali. Sorry for this rush. We're a little lagging behind time. And right now, because of the time constraint, we are not taking questions or comments on this statement. We request all the participants to send their comments in writing to the secretariat at foodsoft.org. I would request our technical colleagues to write this email ID in chat box so everyone can see the email ID, and please send your comments there. You have the text with you from which Wali read out. Very, very important points are there. So now we are at the end of our webinar, and to cap off our gathering today, let us call P. Chennaiyaji, the chairperson of Asian Peasant Coalition, APC and PCFS, executive committee member, and he will give us the closing remark. So Chennaiyaji, please, the floor is yours. Do we have Chennaiyaji with us?
I think Ujani, Rhoda sent me a text that Chanaya is not. I think he is not
Okay.
communicated with Rhoda. I don't know
So
if
in that
Rhoda can.
case, I take the. In that case, I take. Do we have him? Last 10 seconds. Waiting for him. If not, then I take the liberty to wrap up today's webinar with the permission of the host. And just to summarize what all our speakers have highlighted today very nicely and very strongly. Anyone is saying anything? If not, then please mute yourself. Penki, could you please mute yourself? Okay. Participants, please mute yourself so we can actually, yeah, basically we can wrap up today's very, very informative webinar. So what all the speakers said, and I try to summarize, a battle for the future of our lands, food and rights is underway. In July 26, 28, basically these are some upcoming events. In July 26, 28, the Secretariat of the United Nations Food System Summit, UNFSS, will convene for a pre-summit in Rome, Italy. They are set to unveil the so-called game-changing solutions, quote-unquote game-changing solutions that they have gathered from the dialogues that they have initiated since 2019. The UNFSS, which will be held in New York in September, is expected to map out the policy agenda on food, agriculture, and food systems for the decades to come. Signs of corporate capture. Here, the signs of the corporate capture are very clear. The undemocratic decision of the UN General Secretariat in the same year to enter into a strategic partnership with the Billionaires Club World Economic Forum, WEF, the appointment of Agnes Kalibata, head of Bill Gates-funded Alliance for a Green Revolution in Africa, AGRA, and members of WEF's Global Agenda Council as the special envoy. The FAO's alliance with the Agrochemical Industry Association, CropLife International, entrenchment of numerous corporate-funded GM pesticides and biofortification lobbies like the Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition in the summit's action tracks, among others. The Global People's Summit on Food Systems is committed to exposing the intricacies and dire impacts of the unjust, unequal, unhealthy, and unsustainable food systems we have today, in opposing a surrender global food governance to TNCs and uplifting the voices of the marginalized rural peoples of the global south. There is an urgency to assert and fulfill the human right to safe, affordable, adequate, and healthy food for everyone, for community-led agroecology, peasant rights to land and resources, genuine fisheries and aquatic reforms, and people's food sovereignty. I think all the speakers have, in a way or other, touched upon these points. So this is the appeal from the hosts. Join the activities to hashtag seize the summit. Video of the video could be shown if the time permits and the technical colleagues are ready. We urge you to visit foodsoft.org website, and if you are holding any activities and actions to protest against the UN Food System pre-summit, use the hashtag, as I have mentioned, seize the summit, or tag us at Our Food Systems in Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Use our poster and campaign materials. These are some of the appeals from the host organizations from our side. And I thank you very much. Thanks on behalf of all the host organizations. Thank you very much to all our speakers and to all the participants for the very interesting and fruitful discussions on how the current neoliberal trade framework is dictating fishing policies of nations across the world. And of course, thank you for your wonderful insights on how the People's Movement will counter this trend. Thank you for joining today's session, and let us seize the summit. Let us junk WTO. Looking forward to seeing you once more. And from our side, this evening, morning, afternoon, wherever you are in the world. Goodbye to everyone for now, and stay safe. And I just hand over to our other colleagues in the secretariat and our technical colleagues for any other announcement. Thank you. If there is no other comments or clarifications from any side, then I think this is the end of today's webinar. We hope to be in touch, and the host, please close the webinar. Thank you, good evening, and goodbye, everyone.